the session in April. I was really unwell, and special thanks again to Cropper Foundation for actually hosting this webinar. I hope this webinar can be shared. Oma, I don't know if it is, you can record it. So, because it's only for a certain amount of persons, it can be shared to a wider audience, because we at FFOS believe that our contribution here we make today is important, and we have sacrificed many things in the past to make civil societies movement stronger and more purposeful and more meaningful. We also cherish the value that we bring to the table in terms of development planning, because we represent the vulnerable and the voiceless, and they actually depend on us to be environmental watchdogs today. So let's get our presentation started. So if it is you are hoping to get into the field of the environmental management, first of all, you kind of have to understand what the environment means, and to us, what the environment means to you. It is important to understand that if it is you're entering the environmental field, it's like a multifaceted dragon, meaning that it has multiple layers, and it's more than plants and animals. It's more than protecting plants and animals. You must have broad perspective of the global scenarios, like you're gonna have climate change and marine plastic pollution. But you also
Lisa, can I just stop you for, I think you may need to just reshare your screen
okay.
quickly. So just end and restart, right?
Okay.
Great.
It's good now, right, Uma?
Yes, I believe so. Everyone, can you see her screen? Okay, great. Yes, working now.
Okay, so you must have a broad perspective of the global environmental scenarios like climate change and marine plastic pollution, but also local impacts of the extractive sector, that is like the oil and gas and the quarry sectors. And you need to have an understanding, a firm understanding actually, of the enforcement of our environmental laws and its legislative capacity. What is the limitations of our laws and how it is we can improve our laws to serve the environment better. And we also look at public health and safety. A lot of our activism is focusing on ensuring that social justice and ensuring that communities who are without a voice, they are not trampled on by big developments or decisions, or by the decision making made by governments. We also focus on ecological justice. So that is fighting. Found on the internet. So that is, sorry about that. That is representing the plants and animals and their habitats, especially the environmentally sensitive species and the areas. One of our main focus as well is focusing on equity, and people sometimes think, what does equity have to do with the environment? And because equity to us is like, first of all, for you to be protecting the environment, you need to be financed, you need to have funding. And it's an expensive luxury to take care of the environment. Because if you look at the first world countries, you'll see they have really good legislative environmental laws. And you see a lot of people focusing towards, and a lot of energy and money is focused towards protecting the environment. And they are much more environmentally conscious as compared to third world countries. And because, locally in FFOS, we focus on the equitable distribution of wealth in terms of value for money. And so we're looking at what's something we call value for volume. So we look at the values of volume Trinidad is paid for its oil and gas extracted as compared to the values paid to the other parts of the world for the same volume. And because sometimes we believe that in third world countries, they don't get the same value for our oil and gas as compared to a first world country. And this is where the whole idea of corruption starts, and corruption actually erodes a national economy. And therefore in FFOS, we do keep an eye on the importance of procurement legislation, which is actually still to date has not been made effective. And we tend to have a lot of corrupt countries having the weakest environmental laws, and this is why where you have countries that have abundant resources, they suffer with a resource curse. And they actually need to have, as well as Trinidad, we need to have proper resource and financial management. So in terms of looking at the environment, we just don't focus on the plants and animals, we focus on humans, and we also focus on financial management of our resources. And I mean, if there's corruption and fraud taking place, there simply cannot be any kind of environmental conservation and sustainable development. So in one of our major programs, again, is looking at major planning projects. So we not only look at the potential negative impacts of these major projects, but we also look at the cost of these projects and how it is the finances, where the finance is coming from, of course, from a public purse, but how well it's being managed. Right, so we are looking at what environmental protection entails. And it's really important for you to understand that protecting the environment in today's world is not about tree hugging. It's beyond or tickling a turtle's neck. It's simply about sustainable development and is governed by a written legislation, written procedure process. And this information should be sound and backed by scientific data, and it should be consulted upon of the relevant stakeholders and the public in general. And we cannot effectively protect the environment if we don't protect our legislation. And legislation is the key to environmental protection. And FFOS, since our inception, approximately in 1996, we have fought to develop and now protect our environmental act, and it's called the Environmental Management Act. And we continue to fight and protect freedom of information, the independence of the authority. Our authority in Trinidad is called the Environmental Management Authority. We fight for this freedom of the empowerment of the stakeholders to be able to meaningfully participate in the whole development planning and decision-making process, and where the voiceless can be heard. If those voices are not considered, and if the approval process is shown to be, or arguably shown to be flawed in some sort of, in our legislative process, our laws in Trinidad allow us as private citizen or hire a lawyer to go before a court and challenge decisions of the EMA or challenge decisions of the government of the day, both in the High Court and to a lesser extent in the Environmental Commission. And so just a brief overview on our environmental law in Trinidad is that for you to understand the environment, as mentioned before, you need to have a good understanding of environmental law. And environmental law for the past 20 years, it has become intertwined with sustainable development and protection of human and environmental rights. And after years of advocacy, because it was passed in 1995, but before it had at least 20 years advocating for the environmental laws we passed in Trinidad, and it was further repealed in the year 2000, but by a special majority. It means that it needs to have a special majority vote in Parliament, and because of this, our Environmental Act supersedes all of the previous environmental legislation in the past. We didn't have any specific legislation, but they were embedded in other environmental laws, were embedded into other legislation. But the Environmental Act supersedes all of these minor legislation, but only became effective by substitute legislation in the year 2001. In a nutshell, the Environmental Management Act, it makes provision for the protection of our country resources, the management of waste, prohibition of air, noise, water, land, and land-based pollution. And it must be noted that our act is very unique because it is at least one of the best legislations we have in the Western Hemisphere. It's the best in the Caribbean, but it gives unique special powers, meaning that it is the only legislation that gives a legislative power to our policy, which is the National Environmental Policy. And we have had 3 iterations so far. In the past, it was we first had it in 1998. It was revised in 2006 and now revised in 2018. Just a brief overview of who we are in FFOS. We are one of the very first formalized NGOs that have been advocating for the environment. And since 1996, we were known as Fishermen and Friends of the North Coast. We started off mainly focusing on matters with regards to the sea and marine degradation and marine pollution. So back in 1996, we were focusing mainly on shrimp pollution and shrimp trawling. We eventually widened our scope because we believe that everything on land affects the sea. So therefore we started representing communities on land, focusing on sustainable development, land degradation, land pollution, specifically where human health and equality of life is affected. We use advocacy as our first choice, but a lot of times where advocacy fails and court of public opinion fails, we are still having to overcome our challenge that we are faced with. We are first faced, the final forum is to go to the High Court or to the Environmental Commission. I mean, we don't go to the High Court first because going to the High Court is very costly to FFOS, very costly to the public purse as well. Because most of the times you go against the EMA, we go against the decisions of the government because we believe in some way they are not protecting the environment or protecting the public's interest, or goes against public interest. Unfortunately, the Environmental Commission, it has very limited jurisdiction, so many times you often have to go to the more formalized high courts. And FFOS is actually one of the very first NGOs to challenge the decisions of the government, and we focus on mainly developmental process, CEC rules in particular. And we have been challenging the grants of EMA approvals, and that has not been following the due process of our laws. And so this is where we are first and foremost that we are protectors of environmental legislation. Again, because for us to protect the environment, we need to protect our legislation. We need to have robust legislation to aid us in environmental protection and conservation. We have had a total of 7 High Court actions so far, but as you can see, out of these 7 times, we have been successful 2 times actually, what I have highlighted in red. It is the High Court, which went all the way to Privy Council. Privy Council is the water pollution rules, fees, permits, and that started in 2008 and in 2016. And another success was when we went to the High Court to challenge the EMA's decision to grant an approval to a chicken farm in Piparo, and that was in 2012. Despite being ruled against the court we have one presently before the court, and that is number 1, where we are challenging the decision of the EMA to only grant us 10% of environmental impact assessment and EIA. I mean, as you can see, we have had 4 losses so far, and despite being ruled against the court in these 4 cases, we've had successes because we've been able to establish certain precedents in these cases. For example, in the BPTT case, and that is number 7, that started in 2002. This particular case has been cited many times in the Commonwealth, and actually defines time and it defines delay in judicial review. And FFOS is known, in that case, we were known for coming late before the court, but it was no fault of ours. And I will speak later on about the challenges we face as an activist. And subsequent to this matter, the EMA actually fought to recover, when we lost this BPTT matter, the EMA sought to recover costs from FFOS by attempting to hold the directors personally responsible and by lifting the corporate veil. And our environmental law do provide for such action to take place, but it's only if it is they found these directors of the NGOs to be vexatious. In this case, FFOS had nothing to gain in challenging the decision, but rather we were fighting for the people in Guayagawari. And this attempt can actually potentially have destroyed the hopes of other public interest groups and challenging any decision of the EMA or the government of the day. And we were successful thank God, in proving that it was simply acting in public interest with no personal benefits, and the matter was dismissed at the High Court. And this actually shows that, and actually gives the encouragement to other NGOs that they can be protected somewhat. That if it is they do challenge the decision of the government or the EMA, they don't have to bear the legal cost. They don't have to bear the legal cost of the government. In the case of the Atlantic LNG, that is seen in number 6, it started in 2003. That particular case, it defined Trinidad and Tobago, meaning that we became the first Caribbean country to judicially examine the precautionary principle and the role of environmental justice in the development and implementation and enforcement of environmental laws and policies that we depend on. And it actually shows, it actually accepted that the importance of cumulative impacts and cumulative effect, and was recognized an important, being one important considerations in carrying out an environmental assessment. In that particular case, it was known as the hard look, giving we must give a hard look, is a hard look test, and we have to give a hard look when it is we are granting, when the EMA are granting the approvals of CECs or major development projects. We have defined the water pollution, we have defined polluters pay principle through the action of the water pollution rules permit. In this case, the EMA had a flat fee system, meaning that whether you're a small chicken farmer or whether you're a big oil company, you're paying the same $10,000 to allow to pollute in the environment. And this had a major impact to the environment, but it's a form of social injustice. I mean, how can you be allowing small chicken farmers to pay the same price for a permit as a big company? And thankfully, even though it was a 9-year-long battle, we stopped it and we were successful at the Privy Council. And the water pollution rules fees permits has been amended and to suit, and it's based upon the principles of the polluters pays principle. But our recent case that we had started in 2017 and finished in 2018, it was the decision of the EMA to grant the highway along the southern boundary of the savannas. Sadly, in this matter, we actually lost the right to be consulted in the draft terms of reference. I mean, that was a major hit for FFOS. Since in our inception, we have been consulted and actually helping the EMA in drafting a proper terms of reference. And we have fought to ensure that the public was consulted in this early part of the CEC process. Sadly, we have lost our right to be consulted, and FFOS hopes sometime in the future, can I get my power cord? FFOS hopes sometime in the future that we can repeal the decision of the Court of Appeal. And back to our back to number 1, which is our very most recent matter still before the court. As litigants, we cannot speak too much on this particular matter, but what we can say is that we are currently challenging the decision of the EMA to only grant 10%, meaning that they deny the public a full copy of the EIA, and this 10%, a hard copy. And this 10% they are allowing us to get is simply based on the discretion of the EMA. So it's up to 10% and based on the discretion of the librarian of the EMA. So if it is she suspects that you're going to be using it for financial purposes, she may not even give you a single page of that EIA. And the EMA is arguing that this newly adopted policy was due to copyright restrictions laid out in the Copyright Act, and we are arguing that how can this be, because the EIA is supposed to be a public document, and this restriction is particularly unjust, especially when it is you're reviewing an EIA. Reviewing an EIA is most important because it's like a tool that aids the EMA in the granting of a CEC. And this is one of the most important part of the CEC process, because it is the only way that the public, through statutes, through our Environmental Management Act, can effectively become part of the decision-making process, and they can give their views and voice their opinions on whether they are for the project, whether they're against the project, what can be done to mitigate these the potential negative effects. And it is important because at the end of the day, these projects are affecting the people, and the people must have a voice in the decision-making process. And therefore, reviewing of the EIA is most important in the CC process. An EIA, if anyone has seen an EIA, it's at least over 1,000 pages, and you're going to have multiple different, it's interdisciplinary, so there are multiple different sciences. You're going to have environmental cumulative impact assessments. You're going to have social impact assessments. You're looking at the methodologies they've used, and of course, a brief overview of the project, and you're going to have mitigation measures. So a lot of the times, we don't get local experts to review this EIA. So we usually get for the past 20 years, up till 2018, we will usually get full copies of an EIA. Before initially it was in a CD drive, a CD disk, and now they've started charging us 50% per page. So we will get hard copies and we will scan and send it abroad. Because sometimes we don't get local scientists to review it because they're afraid to work for us because they think we're against the government. And a lot of times we do get pro bono assistance from international scientists. But if it is we only get 10% of an EIA, how can we really effectively and meaningfully comment on documents if it is we don't have it as an entire team? And without being able to examine all of the various scientific sections of the entire EIA, these international scientists who we go to, they can't assess the environmental and social impacts in a holistic manner. And this means that our ability to meaningfully participate is compromised, and our core main focus of FFOS, we are crippled in this instance. And there are many NGOs who have been actually reviewing EIAs. We have COPUs as part of the EIA review team of the EMA. They are also crippled because they can't meaningfully participate. And to us, FFOS, in our opinion, it appears that the government or the EMA is actually inadvertently attempted to hinder meaningful, informed public participation and the decision-making process of granting a CC. And civil society is becoming muted, actually, and if it is we can't meaningfully participate, we can't voice opinions, and we need these technical and scientific guidelines to meaningfully participate. And without access, this is simply all about accessing information, and this is one of the core values that the United Nations set out. And for it to have sustainable development, you need to have public consultation. If you have public consultation, you have access to information. And there can be no transparency if it is you don't have access to information. And if there's no transparency, you can't have accountability. And the decision-making process becomes unchecked, it becomes exclusive, it becomes dictatorial. And primary stakeholders, they have a meaningful role in this development process and should not be stifled, and it should be, but yet empowered. And this is what FFOS is trying to do with other partner NGOs, trying to empower other NGOs to become more vibrant in terms of environmental protection and become more aware of the environment and legislation, and to be able to meaningfully participate in the everyday decisions that affect them. And so, I mean, even though we have all of a list of losses behind our backs, we also have a list of successes. And these are very small successes that we must embrace, because it's a long, hard road for us, and environment protection is not an easy win. Going before the court is not very easy for us. It's a long, grueling process. I remember myself personally when it is we were working on the Arepa Savannas matter. Our lawyers quit the matter 48 hours before, and myself and Mr. Wood worked tirelessly for an entire week. I mean, we were working straight 36 hours within that week. Twice we did that within that week, working 36 hours, rushing to get the prints, rushing to fix documents, rushing to get JP commissioner to sign off on the documents and filing the matter exactly at 4 o'clock on the dot when the court was closed. We filed our matter. So that is the small successes and that is the sacrifices we make every single day to ensure that we are doing our work. We have seen a huge wave of environmental consciousness moving across Trinidad, and FFOS is actually glad to be one of the major forces behind this particular movement. And that is one of the small successes we can say that we are very proud of, because I'm sure for that whole highway, Aripo Savannah highway matter, a lot of people are aware now what is the Aripo Savannas. They know the kind of animals we have there, and they know that it's an environmentally sensitive area. So if it is you're getting into the field of environmental activism, you should be aware of the challenges that we face every single day. And these are some of them. Many times the environmental activists do stand alone, even when they're representing different communities. Sometimes represent, in this case of Aripo Savannah Matter, we represent plants and animals. And you do face a lot of challenges. And despite being alone, you need to have that level of dedication in you to persevere no matter what. Sometimes, even in that case, we didn't have the support of the community actually because they were very scared. And we didn't have the support of other NGOs as well. And in that particular matter, we also faced with lawyers who had no conscience because we had lawyers who were taking our money and not doing the work. We had lawyers who were quitting 48 hours before the deadlines to file, and as well as we had some even intentionally tanking the matter before the judges. So we had to go through 4 sets of lawyers for us to file the matter. So that is the kind of struggles we had to go through, but I mean, we had to do it. We were trying to protect the Aripo savannas, which is like the largest naturally occurring savannas we had in Trinidad. It is simply a one of a kind. We had endemic species there. We had our environmentally sensitive species, the ocelot, living there as well. And sometimes we've had betrayals by community, and they even accepted compensation from the government or from other companies and signing agreements not to donate funds to FFOS because we don't take money personally for ourselves. We ask the donations to pay our lawyers. And this is a matter back in Atlantic LNG when we were challenging the decision of the train 4, where Mr. Buddha and some lawyers went down to represent communities, and the communities were being paid mere pittance for compensation for their housing, and they went behind our backs, signed agreements with the oil companies, and they got money, they were well compensated, but they had a signed agreement stating that they would not give FFOS, or they wouldn't even pay the lawyers at FFOS, which is what they agreed initially for FFOS to represent them. FFOS received no kind of international funding, so we actually self-funded. We sometimes get donations from our fishermen who we represent, and that is how we survive actually, through donations mainly. We sometimes face with conflicts of interest and compromise standards. This is where any civil society movements, in civil society, is something you have to really bear in mind, that you're going to meet other NGOs that may not agree with you, and that's fine. But you have to know what is the basis of their disagreements. When it is, I was going through personally myself in Savannah's matter, I asked other NGOs for help, and they said to me they're afraid to go against this particular development because it is one of the major projects of the government of the day. And if it is, they go against the project, they are afraid that their funding from the government is cut off. And that is their main reason for not wanting to help you, because it's a fear and there's a stigma that if it is you challenge the decision and it is, you are known as becoming radical. So, and this has occurred many times in the past, and again, through my personal experience with the Aripo Savannah matter. And sometimes if it is you do work with NGOs, again, as a NGO like FFOS, sometimes you become blacklisted and you're targeted. And being labeled as radical. And it actually does hinder you getting some job opportunities locally, especially working for the government. But on the reverse side, working with NGOs can help promote your marketability, because I am in contact with international NGOs and other local NGOs who are looking for activists like myself, and it is the plus side of activism. We have sometimes in the past where persons who in my position, they have actually they have awarded jobs to work in the UN, actually. So it's a plus side in becoming, in entering the environmental field and entering in activism. You become known and you become a fighter for the environment. And this is a positive to your CV and your resume. But sometimes you also have organizations, they want you locally because they want to obtain information from NGOs and be able to infiltrate their thought process and what is their next move, just simply to shut down NGOs. So if it is you're able to predict what is the FFOS next move and you have that inside information, it can be used against NGOs. So this is also a fear that NGOs do have working. I think my screen, okay. This is a fear NGOs do have in working working in activism. So I mean, I've discussed all of the challenges that we face, my personal challenges that I have faced in FFOS and working, doing all of this kind of work. So the big question is, like, despite everything and all of our losses, why do I continue it? Every different career gives a different sense of satisfaction. In my life, I have done different jobs. One of them came from the oil and gas sector, working on a seismic vessel. And this is where experience, the rules are banned for the sake of convenience. So, I mean, if it is you stop a seismic vessel, you're potentially costing the company millions of US dollars. So just to save a couple dolphins, just to save a couple turtles. So it was banned for the sake of convenience. And although at the time I didn't really know the serious impact of seismic surveys, I knew the rules are being broken. I knew the rules are being bent. And day after I left, I got my job at FFOS. And there were several challenges we faced, as I mentioned before, and litigations we encountered. And it has taught me the critical importance of doing something and the critical reward that I feel personally when I do something good without that expectation of a reward. And the idea of doing something good for me is helping the defenseless parties, is helping those animals and plants who don't have a voice, who don't have anyone to advocate on their behalf. And it creates a sense of satisfaction I don't get anywhere else personally for me. Actually, it's true. Urban Savannah's Matter, it realized that where I belong, and I was able to, because of that whole litigation, I pursued my career, I pursued my education in doing a Bachelor's of Law through the University of London. In that way, I'm able to hopefully, when I graduate, I'm able to practice both internationally and locally. And I am going to be specializing in environmental law. Actually, I remember speaking with a senior counsel, and he asked me what I'm going to specialize in. I told him environmental law. He looked at me point blank and said that, Lisa, you are condemning yourself in abject poverty. And because even though I suspect, well, I know he's exaggerating, he was speaking some truth to a certain extent, because in the kind of work that we do, we get no kind of financial reward. We are not paid at all for the work that we do. We don't take money from the communities, because a lot of these communities, they are impoverished without any kind of financial resources. And it is simply in the name of public interest. We do everything in FFOS for, and we don't even get funding from the government. So why simply we do all of this, to me, gives a sense of satisfaction. And again, it created new opportunities for me to pursue my education in Bachelor's of Law. And I do have an environmental background, so you do actually find very few lawyers in Trinidad who are fighting for the environment have an environmental background. The lawyers that I know that we work with, actually most of the times they get the environmental information in the full litigations from FFOS, because they themselves don't have this kind of information. And to me, it's doing something helpful, it's something to help someone, being an FFOS and helping people. It gives me some sense of meaning in my life. And even though the work in FFOS is simply a small dent in the face of environmental genocide that we face in our nation, it gives me a sense of purpose, and it gives me a sense of place in this world where I have a voice to contribute meaningfully. And to me, I have been rewarded by the work I've done in a way that money cannot reward me. I know, I mean, if it is, I'm doing environmental law, I may not be able to get the cost of a big defamation suit or big cost of oil and gas lawyers. But in a way that my work here in FFOS and also FFOS on its whole, history will remember us in a way that is priceless. And Gary, being one of our major founders, he does have he's well known for his work he done at FFOS. And to me, hopefully I can be there someday, and it is something I don't want to give up, continue working and developing myself and developing environmental law in Trinidad. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. If it is you want more information, we have our website. We are updating often, and that's my cell number there, and you can contact us also via our email.
Okay, great. I think you just have to reshare that last slide again. I'm not seeing it coming up.
Okay.
Yeah, so you just have to do. Right, great. So I'm seeing it now. All right, everyone. So we have three questions here already. As I said before, everyone's muted. So if you look at the bottom of your screen where you have reactions, if you want to get unmuted to ask a question, you can just give a thumbs up and I'll unmute you. But right now we can start with the first one from Monica, asking about if you can give some more information on the limited jurisdiction of the Environmental Commission.
When we had our Atlantic LNG matter, we did not appeal the decision of the High Court, but rather we took the matter to the Environmental Commission, and we represented communities, one namely Michelle Dove and Vijay Sukhdev Singh. In the Vijay Sukhdev Singh matter, which when it took to the Environmental Commission, it was being argued by the EMA that the Environmental Commission doesn't have a jurisdiction as per the Environmental Management Act, because their interpretation was very literal. If you go through the Environmental Management Act, you would see certain clauses, for example, and it appeals can go to the Environmental Commission. So only when you see that occurring in the Environmental Management Act, because of literal interpretation by the court, it has actually limited the jurisdiction of the Commission. So it is mainly based on the decisions of the EMA, and but not all of his decisions. So it's and we have not appealed that decision as yet. We actually something we hope to intend to do in the future. We're just waiting for the perfect case to do it, actually. But it is based on the literal interpretation of the Act, and where you only see you can appeal to the Environmental Commission, that is where their jurisdiction is limited to.
Okay, great. Kavir, do you want to ask your question? I'll unmute you. Let me find you in the list. Okay, Kavir, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask Lisa. And I think Gary's still behind somewhere if he wants to jump in. All right, Kavir, go ahead.
Here as well. He's next to me.
Thanks, Michael. Omar, sorry. Yeah, I was just I was just wondering about laws in terms of land cost, say particularly at on the coastline. Like, shouldn't somebody be held responsible for that? And who is that really? You know, is it the main people who are causing global warming, or is it the government because they're not protecting they're not protecting that. They're not doing, putting measures into place to protect the coastline. That's it.
I just want to understand your question. Are you asking who is responsible for protection of our coastlines?
Yes, I think he's asking about, with sea level rise and the loss of property and that sort of thing. Is that a matter that could be handled at a national level, or is that something wider?
You want?
Okay. Well, the first thing I want to say is hello, everybody, and congratulations to Lisa and her team. They created a very inspiring presentation. Regarding the question, it's a bouncing ball, that question, because is it that he's asking who is responsible, or who should be responsible, or shouldn't we have someone individually responsible? And my answer to all of the above is that unless we are able to teach the science of environmental stewardship and management on the widest possible scale, our laws will continue to not serve us. So that the entity that should manage coastal management would need to be empowered by a specific law that would create particular regulatory structures to ensure that development or change of coastline, etc., should be followed in a particular manner. We have requirements regarding coastal modifications that must go to the EMA if you're modifying the coast. But we've had situations where the government and private sector have modified mangroves, which in particular are protected. We have a no net loss policy for mangroves. And mangroves are removed every day by the state, starting with Invaders Day. And even though the no net policy is very specific that if you move it from one place, you should put it back in another place, we have never had, save and except a very small effort by the Ministry of Planning 2 years ago in Brickfield, where every single tree that they painstakingly planted, and we were part of that volunteer effort, none have survived. So we don't have any particular coastal management entity. The limited amount of laws is reflective of the fact that the parliamentarians, with great respect to them, don't properly understand the science of environmental management. And regretfully, up until this time, we have never had a president or prime minister who considered the importance of an independent senator to represent the public interest of the environmental movement. So perhaps your voices in another decade or two, but how much degradation and improper decisions would have been made? Do we have the time? Can we wait? It's an important question, and I'm sorry I couldn't give a more specific answer, but save and except for what limited jurisdiction the EMA has with coastal modifications requiring an EIA, and the fact that the National Environmental Policy, which is now law, is very specific that there's a no net loss policy regarding mangrove removal. Mangroves are removed, and the EMA have not done anything about it because the main violator has been the state. And so we need a stronger parliamentary agenda. And I hope one of the listeners would end up as an independent senator and could represent these issues.
Well, talking about that, Shania asked, and I think this one is for Lisa. So she would like to become an environmental lawyer. So she asked, does one have to get a bachelor in law first, or can you look at the environmental policy side of things instead?
You have to get a Bachelor of Law first. Actually, in Trinidad, I think it was only when you go to FFOS, then it is just one particular course you can do in environmental law. When I had done my master's, there was a course, and it was taught by, back then, Professor Rajendra Ramlogan. He actually taught me environmental law, but it didn't go in terms of in very detail, because it's just one course out of the entire degree program. But it's only you have to reach to that level of orthodox for you to be exposed to it. Again, they do have an environmental law clinic there, but I am doing a Bachelor's of Law
I think, Lisa, you mean Hugh Wooding?
Sorry, yes, Hugh Wooding, sorry. Sorry, Hugh Wooding. But I am doing a Bachelor of Law first to actually have a law foundation for me. So at least I can also practice in various fields. So I can do property law, I can do all of these other things, and doing conveyances and deeds. But I do intend to do my LPC, and I do intend to do a master's in environmental law, so where I'll be able to specialize in. But I strongly suggest you do your Bachelor of Laws first to get that basic foundation of how the law operates. Hope that answers your question.
Okay, I think so. Okay, Chandel wants to know about some more info on the Togo port development. Chandel, I'm going to unmute you. Maybe you can get a bit more specific with what type of information you would want to find out. So, oops. Sorry, you can go ahead and unmute Chandel.
Hello, like possibly like what animals were impacted, what is like the surface area they're trying to like take out, like just details more if you have any.
With regards to Togo development, just letting you know that due to the whole pandemic, the government did make announcements that the project will be shelved, so it's not being pursued in that sense. However, the CC application has not been withdrawn. So FFOS is still following through the whole process, and recently we get our comments on the EIA. In terms of details of the project, it's approximately, I believe it's 40 hectares of it. Part of it will be reclaimed, the footprint of it. Part of it will be claimed by sea, and part of it will be located on land. As well as we in the northeast where Togo is located, we have a very thriving leatherback turtle population. So, and leatherback since 2013 have been declared as an environmentally sensitive species. And through that legal designation, their habitat is also protected. And that entire northeast coast, straight from, I believe, from Grand River all the way sometimes to Maracas, Las Cuevas, we do have turtles coming to show. So that entire northeast down straight down to, I believe, to Balandra, even lower down to Manzanilla, sometimes you do have turtles there. It's subsidy protected, and you building a Togo port there, you're going to have, one, lights disrupt turtles in terms of when they're coming on shore to nest. You're going to have a lot of collision recently there in down the island, where we actually went down to collect a turtle because it collided with a fisherman's vessel, and the skull had cracked open, and FFOS brought that turtle, and we took it to a vet who was taking care of the turtle. And so we're going to have a lot of more vessel collision with turtles. And as well as in northeast by Togo, not much people knew that we do have a coral reef, it's a deep water coral reef, and it has been surviving despite the high levels. Sorry, something here. Despite the, sometimes you do see water very murky, but that coral reef, despite that, has been able to survive. And we do have a wide range. I myself has surveyed that coral reef and looking at seaweed when I was doing my undergrad degree in UE, and it is actually survived. It's a thriving coral reef. They have had 20 years of research being done by the late Professor Phillip and currently by Dr. Stanford Belford in the US. So the main important, the major animals that are being threatened is that entire coral reef, and as well as our marine turtles.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think also it's important to note that, you know, like NGOs like us, we're not anti-development, but you can't be making the rationale for the port is based on very outdated information in terms of analyses, you know, 30 years plus. So, I mean, you know, development needs to be responsible and well thought out. And I mean, that for Cropper Foundation was the first error, that you can't be making decisions based on information that's 3 decades old. I mean, I would have a question that's related to that, because those of you all who would have been part of the submitting comments, because I know there have been a lot of NGOs submitted comments on the Tokoport EIA, because we had a PDF, we had the files available online, although not downloadable. I just wanted to find out if Lisa, if you could tell us a bit more about the actual process of getting communities and people involved in that CEC or EIA process. Where are the points in which people who are interested, like everyone here, what are the points that we could get involved in that process of development?
Okay, so I will use the example of the Tokoport. When it is the application first came to the EMA, actually you don't have to wait in any particular stage of a development project to get involved, even though legislation, it can tell you where exactly. But when it is the project first came to the CC application, first came to the EMA, FFOS actually got immediately involved. So we didn't wait for them to give a draft terms of reference. We didn't wait for the EIA to be released. We got involved immediately. We got the facts of the application, and we went straight to the community to tell them, listen, this is what is coming to you. And we sent letters to the EMA representing those views of the community. So we actually started the very first time when we got word of the application. We went to the community and given them an idea of the scale of the project and the scope of works and the operations that is coming to Toko region. We also got involved at the draft terms of reference, despite the law according to our Savannah's matter. Despite that, we don't necessarily have to be consulted at the draft terms of reference. Thankfully, in this case, we were consulted and we gave comments again. We looked at the final terms of reference to see what was incorporated and what was not. And we also included those comments. We drafted letters, and as well as we sent that to the EMA with our EIA comments. Also, as well, we went to the first most statutory consultations. When it is you get its draft terms of reference and a finalized terms of reference, it tells you need to go to the stakeholders and have a minimum of 2 public consultations. We went to these consultations and we formalized our comments there as well, in both instances. And as well as we formalized comments when it is the EIA was finalized and out in the public comment period. But I just want to let you know that you will see all right through, we were sending letters to the EMA and we were sending our comments to the public, and as well as informing stakeholders of the process. So you don't have to wait where the EMA come to tell you to ask your comments. You have a voice through the entire process, and your letters will be listed. It will become part of the CEC file that is stored in National Register, which is in the EMA's library. And this is something FFOS has always been doing since we have been focusing on development projects. We don't wait to be consulted on. We go ahead and we give our comments out to the open from the very first start when we get hold of the application. Gary wants to add something as well.
Hi everybody. In 1997, when the Pandey government was in power, they came up with the idea they wanted to do a Toko port. Then, like now, the community was locked out. Then, like now, it was much more than just a ferry service. It was clear then that what they were doing was building an oil terminal tanker bunkering facility, and they said so openly. And then they decorated the project with other little things, like they'll have a ferry, they'll have a hotel, they'll have a this, they'll have a that. To me, Lisa's answer, I endorse everything she said, but there are a couple of things that occurred 20 plus years ago. One is that when we attend public consultations, in Trinidad, there is very little appreciation for these altruistic, affluent, urban travelers to come into a rural community with their own ideas of what the community wants. So normally as a rule, at these public meetings, we always sit at the back and we always wait until the meeting is about, the question and answer period is about to end. And it's a time when everyone has had a chance to ask all of their questions, because the last thing you want to do is to smother the community. And by the end of the meeting, you should have acquired some knowledge as to what are the priorities of the community, what is the community concerned about, what knowledge do they have, how in depth is their knowledge. The other thing that is critically important is that you must know exactly what you're speaking about. You must read everything as much as you possibly can to have an understanding of the project, of the inadequacies or deficiencies in the application process, in the design of the project, the potential impact, what is the natural capital inventory of the area. And at great risk to the environment, you must marry the environmental concerns with the human population concerns there, because sometimes the community would be more interested in killing the species and selling it than in understanding that you could take a visitor to see it and harvest a lesser value more repetitively for the life of the creature. So it's critically important that to win, you must have the community on your side. And to have the community on your side, it's important that you're humble, you wait until the end before you speak. And then when you speak based on positions of fact and positions that you could align yourself with the best interests of the community. I think that is really important. So it's all about the community support, and you can go into a community where you don't know anybody at all, as we normally do, but just by listening quietly and sitting at the back and taking notes and getting names and writing down the names, so that when you refer to the comment made, you could refer to it based on the name of the person. And of course, if you're fortunate to sit next to a friendly community person on your left and right, you can ask and get answers for little things, so you could develop a sense. But community support is critical.
Great. All right. So I think we are about out of time, Lisa. I'll let you have any final words of wisdom to our listeners. And of course, we're recording this, so to whomever might be listening afterwards.
Well, for me, actually, since I was a child, I've always had a passion for the environment, and simply without passion and our dedication, you would not be able to get that level of achievement and satisfaction that you're going to have. And so you therefore have to like what you are doing. For me, most of the times I do work very long hours. I go home and read a lot of our reports and books and stuff like that. But it's not a job for me. Actually, working at FFOS is not a job. It's more like a lifelong commitment. It's more like a dedication. So I don't consider it as a job. And you need to be in that have a kind of feeling for you to want to be in this area and this field of work, because you're going to have a lot of challenges. You're going to have a lot of downfalls and a lot of criticism. But it's up to you to have that feeling, knowing that you are doing good for the public, you are doing good for the environment. That is that feeling that you must embrace, that will carry you on through these periods of the down periods. I think someone recommend from resources like lectures or books to get started in environmental law. Hi, Susanna, I can, if it is you send me an email, I can reply to your email and I can give you a list of the books that I do read and to learn about the environmental laws in Trinidad.
Well, what we're also doing is that at the end of this entire series, because we've gotten this question a lot, so we're going to ask all of the presenters since the start to give us a list of good resources. And we will send that out to all of you all that have registered. and giving us your emails. All right, great. So I would just like to thank especially Lisa, who, Gary has a final.
I want to say three things. One is I want to congratulate and thank Umar for all the good work that he's doing, the Cropper Foundation, and to lend you our full support going forward. Two is we became very famous for people misunderstanding what we do and why we do it. And many people still misunderstand and think we're politically motivated, etc. So I want to say that our first major action was at Invaders Bay when we set up an information camp at Invaders Bay. When we did that for two reasons. One was to highlight the Toko Port development of '97, which was well underway. The other reason was because we wanted to have a demonstration site to show that government would deliberately postponing, delaying, and tampering with the projected environmental laws of Trinidad and Tobago. Because when we went to Invaders Bay in 2000, there was no environmental, in 97, 98, there was no Environmental Management Act in Parliament. And even after, when we were there, we were clamoring for the act, they passed the act, but they didn't pass the rules. So if you have an act without any functioning enforcement of things to do, of how to do, how it would become operationalized, then it's just a waste of time. Just like today, we have the Procurement Act passed, they're employing 20 people and paying them $200,000 a month to enforce the Procurement Act, but the regulations aren't passed. So the act is not operationalized, again, depriving the public purse. And something that we are involved in, perhaps not enough. The third thing I want to say to our brothers who are listening, brothers and sisters who are listening, is that when my friend now deceased, Jimmy Singh, who was an active member of FFOS in the early days, in the early days, he said that when you have a victory, you must celebrate it way out of proportion to what you have won. Because in this field, you have so many defeats that even the smallest success, you must celebrate it and give yourself courage and share the courage and share the happiness with all and sundry. Because when you are defeated all alone. So when you have a victory, as small as it may seem, it must be something that you embrace and remember and commemorate, because they are few and far between and they're very hard to earn. So having said that, I want to encourage your participants to consider what we do as a privilege, as a great privilege, and has given us, and Lisa, I'm sure it has given Lisa, and we have two young men here that you can't see working very hard at FFOS work. See them in the back. I hope, I can't speak for them, but and Lisa said it on her own, but the work in FFOS has given me a sense of purpose, a complete sense of purpose in my life, and I'm so honored to have found this work and to have found you, Omar, and other members, Nicole, Lisa, and all of us who form, in our own private way, a brotherhood of service. Thank you very much for listening.
All right, thanks so much, Gary. And of course, thank you so much to Lisa Premchand. And of course, all her information is on the screen. And I would encourage everyone to follow, FFOS, of course, follow Cropper Foundation on social media, so you're always up to date on what's happening. So thank you all once again, and have a great day. Well, I wouldn't say get home safely to everyone, but be safe, and we'll all be in touch soon. Thanks again, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening.